Hello everyone. Hope you're all having a good day so far. Can you believe we're already into the second month of the new year? Now, at the time of this episode recording, our nation has already seen over 400,000 lives lost to this coronavirus disease. But let's keep doing our part by continuing to mask up, wash up, and stay physically distant. Get yourself signed up and registered to get vaccinated. So, welcome to my 5th episode of Season 2. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, do you need tips for compliance tools? Well, look no more. I get into it in this episode. And I introduce a very special guest from Nexsen Pruet on this episode, our practice group leader, Matthew Roberts. And I also share some fitting words from Winston Churchill. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organization, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss an episode. Please write in a review and rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. Now, a quick disclaimer. Before I get started on the episode, this podcast episode and Nexsen Pruet podcast series do not constitute legal advice, but I am fortunate to work with sound healthcare attorneys at Nexsen Pruet, and as their consultant, I have over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. Again, the opinions and insights throughout are mine alone, and they in no means constitute legal advice. So, let's get into a very special Newsworthy that features my special guest today, Healthcare Practice Group Leader at Nexsen Pruet, Matthew Roberts. I'm so excited to introduce him to all of you. He represents healthcare providers, and that's been a critical mission at Nexsen Pruet for 6 decades. Matthew's dedication to continuing that tradition is why firm leadership selected him to chair our firm's healthcare practice group. Matthew has assisted providers in virtually every aspect of healthcare business. Typically, his engagements are focused on healthcare affiliations and joint ventures, physician-hospital relationships, managed care issues, START and anti-kickback laws, general compliance matters, healthcare contracts, board governance, regulation of tax-exempt hospitals, false care claims analysis and defense, healthcare regulations and legislations. Matthew has set up single service agreements. He's developed integrated physician networks and established other collaborative arrangements between healthcare providers. Matthew collaborates with clients to create and implement strategic plans and has extensive experience advising clients on affiliations, joint ventures, and purchases and sales. He also advises physician relationships, healthcare provider boards on matters that include executive compensation, conflict of interest policies, and board involvement in compliance and quality-related issues. Matthew also works with healthcare clients on ways to minimize their exposures and compliance risks caused by the myriad of regulatory requirements found in the healthcare industry, and to create a culture of compliance to implement on a system-wide basis. He's also routinely worked with providers to assist them in resolving payment and billing disputes with various types of payers. I'm unbelievably honored to work with Matthew and support him on many of his high-level projects. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Matthew.
Thanks, Sonal. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the good work you do on our team and the podcast that you've started. It's been great. We've enjoyed listening to it and enjoyed watching you get the message out about coding and sharing your expertise with other folks.
Excellent. Now, as the leader of our healthcare team, you have your sights on everything current in healthcare. And wow, this has been an enormous year of challenges, particularly in this space of healthcare with the coronavirus pandemic. You even helped start up your own podcast, hosting it, Taking the Pulse, a healthcare podcast for our firm because of the pandemic. And it features industries and leaders and employees affected in various regions of South Carolina. The new year has also started up with final rule changes that were effective on January 1st, 2021 for hospitals. I'm talking about money and transparency in costs for the consumer, the patient. So I thought you could provide my listeners with your takeaways and insights based on your wealth of knowledge and experience on leadership and compliance in healthcare. So can you try and tell us a bit about the why on improving price and quality transparency in American healthcare to put patients first? Executive order.
Well, the why is interesting because the Trump administration has been looking at this issue since when it started, when they came into office in 2017, and in 2019 they finally issued an executive order that dealt with this issue. And what the concept was, policy behind this executive order is they wanted consumers to be better educated as to the cost of healthcare and what hospitals are going to charge for their services. Now, as we all know, hospital charging is hard to understand, even if you're in the healthcare industry. Charge masters are not really what they get paid, and the EOBs that you get as a consumer, as a patient, sometimes are hard to follow and sometimes are mysterious in terms of their relation to the actual cost of healthcare. So what the Trump administration said was, we want you to be more transparent, hospitals, in what you're charging. And so they came up with this rule that the hospitals don't like and have challenged in court and to date lost. And in fact, now it's in effect. It's been in effect for 21 days, and we'll start to see the enforcement of this rule in the weeks and months to come. Now, with respect to what it does, it's broken down into several areas. The first is that hospitals are required to post on their website their standard charge, and standard charges for care, and that can be done in a couple of ways. First, they're required to have a machine-readable digital file containing charges for all items provided by the hospital, and that's includes the following: things like the gross charge, payer-specific negotiated charges, discounted cash prices, and de-identified minimum negotiated charges, and de-identified maximum negotiated charges. And so, these are controversial concepts because these are some of the quintessential trade secrets of what hospitals have in terms of their business operation. So it's very controversial. The hospitals also have to provide a list of 300 shoppable services that a healthcare consumer can review or can schedule in advance, whether it's like a knee replacement surgery, a colonoscopy, and that these shoppable services must include plain language descriptions of the services and group them with ancillary services and provide the discounted cash prices. So if there's no insurance and you're just paying cash, the payer-specific negotiated charges, and de-identified minimum and maximum charges. So of this list of 300 shoppable services, CMS has identified 70 that you had to include, and then they give you discretion to provide the others, the services. So this has been a sea change, and COVID has taken up a lot of hospitals' time and a lot of the healthcare industry's focus, or this would be a bigger issue than it has been in the media. But if you look at your local hospital's website, you'll see probably a price transparency section, and they should have some of the information that I just went through posted, and the question will become, are they technically compliant? Do they provide the right information? And ultimately, the question is going to be, does it really help the consumer?
That's exactly right. Like you said a moment ago, those EOBs in general from the past, before this whole transparency thing, if consumers and patients are not like you and I, who live and breathe this space of healthcare and we understand how to read the EOBs, do you think this transparency, what you just listed, all of those requirements to make things more transparent, do you actually think the regular man and woman, are going to be able to digest and decipher and understand those reimbursement levels, what they can pay for, like your example, the knee replacement? Is it going to be shoppable in terms of it will cost $1,500 at hospital, over there on Elm Street versus the hospital over there on Oak Street? So.
The short answer, Sonal, is probably not.
Yeah.
The short answer is probably not. That the average person is not going to understand the format, particularly in the format that they're being asked to provide and that they're providing today, the real necessary cost if they're trying to do this. Now, what hospitals are doing, more hospitals are doing this, they're using a price estimator tool. Not every hospital is doing this, but I think you're going to see more and more do this, right, where you say, I am looking for the cost of, and it'll be a fairly usual procedure, hip replacement, knee replacement, shoulder replacement, colonoscopy. What is that going to cost me? And I think you're seeing that format, which is a subpart of the entire group that is required to be produced, of data required to be produced under the new rule. And that's a little more user-friendly. And I do think you will start to see that used more. Interestingly, we had an article here in South Carolina, one of the papers in Greenville, South Carolina, posted an article that listed for transplants all of the hospitals in the region, their respective price. Now, what was weird about that is half the hospitals listed, they have charge master charges for transplants, but they don't do them. And so this was a little bit of a journalistic miscue, in my opinion, because they should have said, well, what do you charge for a colonoscopy? What do you charge for a knee replacement? These are things that the average person needs and will eventually get to in their healthcare world. And that would be more useful because some of the more arcane procedures that are listed in the shoppable services, most people don't need, like a transplant. And many hospitals don't provide. So it remains to be seen whether this will be a functional and practical benefit. However, I think that for your listeners, the key point to understand is transparency is not going away. So on the heels of the hospital rule that went into effect January 1, 2021, late last year in 2020, CMS proposed a payer rule that would require similar transparency of the payer industry, dealing with things like cost-sharing information, pricing information, and medical loss ratio credit. So that is not yet final. I expect the payers to challenge in court that rule, and I expect them to likely lose because a lot of the policy that is driving this comes from some of the concepts that were contained in the Affordable Care Act. And ironically, while the Trump administration was trying to repeal and essentially eviscerate the Affordable Care Act, they were also promoting parts of it because the transparency was a part that they were relying on. So I think you're going to see transparency stay. It makes it a little easier for the providers to have a requirement to do this, even though they don't like it. They don't want their competitors to know what they're doing in terms of pricing. Although generally speaking, they're within the same ballpark. But I think that we're going to get to a point, and it won't be just these two final rules. They will one of those proposed. You'll see private industry come in and take this data and then make it more user-friendly and then sell it to provide to consumers is what I think is something that could happen, and put it in more an attractive model for you and easier for you to use. And I think that some of the predictions about us being more conscientious, smart shoppers about healthcare are likely to come true, and in large part because of this transparency push.
I love it. Those are tremendous insights. Do you have a particular date from CMS in terms of when that other final rule will take place in the future?
Yeah. So the final rule, the proposed rule, goes into effect for the payers in July of 2021, and then another aspect of it would go into effect in 2022 if it doesn't get pushed back. The prediction from those who are following this on the political level is that the Biden administration will keep both rules, that they support policy-wise this initiative toward transparency. The hospitals didn't like it for obvious reasons, and they challenged it based on the fact that some of the aspects of the rule were arbitrary and capricious, and made it harder to understand the rule, the specific data being produced. They lost that. There were pretty good arguments, but they lost that at the district court and the Court of Appeals level. We expect that the payers to attempt something similar, and to say that requiring this disclosure of information is actually going to increase the cost of healthcare. That's another argument that the providers and payers have said is if the policy behind these rules is to ultimately get to lower costs because people will understand what they're paying for and the competition will reduce the overall cost, adding additional regulatory requirements is going to actually increase because the cost of compliance is going to be significant, and that will be passed on to the patients. There's probably something to that, but I think that ultimately it is going to be the final result of this is we're going to have more transparency. We're not going to go back. It's just like the advent and explosion of telehealth because of COVID. That's not going to be ratcheted back in a material way. I think it'll continue to expand. And so I think transparency is going to be a bigger part of healthcare going forward. Excellent.
So you've acknowledged that, hospitals might have a little bit of hesitation here. And we understand that there is a very small penalty of $300 per day for the hospital to remain non-compliant. Do you think that monetary setback is going to get them to operate quickly? Or do you think the fact that CMS is going to basically, put the scarlet letter on that hospital and publish the fact that that hospital is not compliant, do you think those types of issues are actually going to matter and make the hospitals operate a bit faster towards compliance?
I don't think the fine is going to be a material deterrent to noncompliance. I think that, and in fact, there is some probably misunderstanding of the rule because it's been reported when the current final rule that's in place for hospitals was a proposed rule, there were discussion about a cap on that. And so there's some people who mistakenly believe that there are caps out there on this of $100,000 per hospital, but there isn't. But for particularly larger hospitals, $300 a day is not a meaningful fine. Now, if they get called out by CMS, then I think that's going to have a different issue. That's going to have a different result. And I think that's going to cause the hospitals to want to come into compliance. I also think payers and or other groups that are patient advocacy groups could come in and call out some of these non-compliant hospitals, and that could create some public relations discomfort for these facilities. I think they'll come into compliance, and I think that right now you've seen some articles in Modern Healthcare and Politico that the hospitals are slow to come in compliance. I think part of that's COVID. They're very focused. I think part of that's focusing on particularly since November the significant increase in COVID patients and the increase in the acuity of care necessary for some of these patients. So the hospital's ability to manage this has been limited the last 3 months. But I also think nobody wants to be the first person to jump into the pool here and show everyone this information. Mm-hmm. But I think eventually we'll get there. I mean, we've done some analysis of different hospital websites throughout the Southeast, and we're seeing a very small percentage of hospitals who are in complete technical compliance at this day. Now, will CMS be particularly aggressive with them since we're in this heightened state of the emergency because of the pandemic? That remains to be seen, but I do think they're going to eventually put pressure on folks to come around and come into compliance.
Excellent. Now, what do you see? Do you see in the future, is there going to be a need for legal to be involved here in the early stages in the next few months? What do you think is going to happen when this price transparency catches on in terms of what are patients going to need?
So I do think that hospitals are seeking legal counsel on their compliance or not full compliance. I think they are trying to figure out what is the impact going to be from a regulatory and a financial standpoint if everybody has all this information. The trickier legal questions might start to occur when patients start using this information, or people who aggregate this information start using it and possibly selling it. That might be a little bit more difficult to try to manage. And the reality is the insurance world between a patient and a hospital has gotten super complicated over the last 30 years. And if you look at medical records, compare our medical record, now they're all digital, is a much bigger file than, let's say, some European companies' medical records, because a lot of it's related to payment. And so what you do, the coding, is making sure that that's one of the many pieces that you have to worry about. But as we start to have transparency be a more accepted part of the healthcare transaction, if you will, I think you'll see patients be a little bit more demanding on the costs. And, a lot of folks, we had on our podcast a guest last week that talked about healthcare being the only industry where the producer of the healthcare services really doesn't have a good sense of what it costs to produce that service, and that cost to produce is not really built into the final price. Now, I would say that it's a little tough to 100% equate the delivery of healthcare services to a manufacturing situation, but I do think there's something to that question, and that's why I think you're seeing this shift from volume-based care, which was certainly incentivized by our existing charge master charges, discount on charge, managed care, government reimbursement setup that we have now, to value-based care, where you're going to get paid to keep people well and to be proactive about keeping them healthy and keeping them out of the hospital. So we're in that transition time now, and I think you'll see more of that. And so I think more transparency probably goes hand in hand with the shift to value-based care.
I agree completely. Times are changing, and patients want, more information so they make smart choices in taking care of themselves today and well into the future. You're absolutely right. I'd also like to see, speaking strictly from the coding and the billing perspective, we definitely do need more transparency in the kind of global care that a patient goes through during, let's say, that knee operation, right? There are charges from the surgeon. There are charges from that anesthesiologist. If there's any pathology that's involved. So I know I've spoken to patients over the years who are, confused over those multiple bills that they received. That information was not disclosed to them at the point of care. So hopefully, as the months go by, we'll have much more in the works in terms of the multiple groups of physicians that are in the care of patients.
Right. I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think that, ultimately, we want to be able to simplify that healthcare bill so it's down to one page that gives you a line item for, what you inpatient or outpatient service, anesthesia, pathology, whatever it was, so people understand this is what it cost me to get this procedure done, or this is what it cost me to go, have to deliver a baby or go through the emergency room or anything else. I think that's the ultimate goal of where we're headed.
Exactly. Matthew, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share on this topic?
No, it's going to be an interesting ride here in the next year or so as we deal with the confluence of COVID-19 and its impact on the healthcare system, because I think one of the things that it exposed is we are very good at handling major health issues, major operations, complicated operations. We are probably not as good as we would like to be at managing public health issues and preventative measures. So that, I think, is going to be on the forefront of what we all think about. I think public health is going to be something that's more in people's minds and their role in it. And I think we're making a shift to value-based care. And I think you're starting to see the healthcare system change slowly but surely, and the pandemic will help accelerate that change.
I love it. Just fantastic, Matthew. I really appreciate, thank you so much for being here today with me. I know my listeners are going to appreciate all of your insights on price transparency, the way things are looking currently, and what's going to happen in the landscape in the new year. So,
all right. Glad to do it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Matthew.
All right. Take care.
And now, it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. Now, it's vital for certified coding professionals to always strive and lead the charge in coding compliance. An important element towards that mission is obtaining all the necessary tools in your mighty toolbox. Books. I just received my HCPCS Level 2 Expert Edition from the AAPC for 2021. They were a bit behind on shipping this year. On prior episodes in Season 1, I already shared the facts when I received my 2021 ICD-10-CM and CPT coding manuals. But now I have all my main, serious tools, the trifecta, the three musketeers, if you will, are all here. Now, for 2021, I feel secure and buttoned up with all my many tools I use for auditing and ensuring compliance and integrity. So, keep gaining all the tools and knowledge you need to keeping up to your maximum level of performance. So, by understanding the fine details surrounding coding and documentation for compliance, a more accurate, vibrant, and vivid medical picture can be painted for your certified medical coders to abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark is from the late British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. The price of greatness is responsibility. I agree wholeheartedly. When it comes to greatness, there is a tremendous sense of duty to use that greatness with the very best intentions in mind for others. I'm happy Winston Churchill's spark still burns brightly in all of us today. So, that wraps up today's episode, today's very special episode. Please go out and make this a great day, a great week for yourselves. Go out and do a little more, be a little more, give back in any way you can in 2021. I appreciate you diving into today with me. And if you would like to inquire about my consultant services, you can always reach me through my email address at nexsenpruet.com. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please continue staying safe and healthy, practice safety for one and all during our collective life in the time of coronavirus. Thank you for listening in on today's episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday. If you want more information from me, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn or send me an email at sonalpatel@nexsenpruet.com for all my consulting services in medical coding, auditing, and compliance. Thank you.